Hello and welcome to Unit 2 of the Level 3 Health and Social Care. This is week 1 and we're looking at communication. So Unit 302 is communication in health and social care. So part 1 for this week is understanding the role of effective communication. What is it all about? And the learning outcomes we're going to look at, I've got all your learning outcomes for the whole unit here, but we're going to be focusing this week on all the 1 point learning criteria. We're going to think about what are the methods used to communicate in health and social care. We're going to think about some of the strengths and weaknesses of both formal and informal communications, the principles of effective communication, and some of the barriers. Now, the strengths and weaknesses, you're going to have to try and work out for yourself, really, because I've given you quite a lot of reading to do. We've got a whole chapter on communication that you can read your way through. You don't have to read it all in the first week. You can read it as you go along, but that should give you that little bit of extra detail to help you with some of these assignment criteria. Okay. So what is communication? What do you think communication is? Maybe stop and think for a moment before you move down. You can always jot down some ideas on a notepad and see what you think. What is communication? Take a moment. So my definition is it's a two-way process which is affected by the environment in which that communication takes place. So communication in a classroom, uh, maybe in one sort of style, communication between your friends and yourself when you're out at McDonald's having a burger or something like that would be a very different style of communication. Communication, maybe if you're at work and talking to your employer, will be different again. Okay. So it's never straightforward and it's never just about one individual. It's usually about somebody else as well. So it's about relationships, it's about the environment, and then it's also about understanding the specific needs of the people that you work with when you're talking about communicating within care. Okay, so bear in mind you've got this sort of slight extra thing where when you're working with your service users, you're there to communicate their needs, to find out what they need and find out what you can do for them. So communication in general is about making sure our needs are recognized and our wishes are known, whether they be good, bad, or indifferent, really. It's also about at least one living person interacting with another one living person in any way. Without someone on the other end of your communication, you're not actually having a communication in a sense. So it's about that other person listening, understanding, and coming back to you. So it's a two-way interaction. The most important aspect is that it's a two-way process, as I said. It's about giving and receiving a message. And here's the sort of classic process of the message. Somebody sends a message, your brain encodes it in a way that the person, hopefully, that you're speaking to will understand. So you don't use language, if you're talking to someone that they don't understand, or you make sure you do. The message goes to that person, and then their brain takes it and decodes it in a way that they will understand. So your brains are doing quite a lot of work. They hear and they decode, and they send a message saying, "Oh, this is what she meant," and you go, "Oh yeah, I understand that," and then you're able to make a response. So if you're alone and there's no one to see you and no one to hear you, and your communication isn't being picked up by anyone, effectively you're not communicating. So if you're like the poor man in The Martian, where you're left on another planet, floating around, and you've got no radio and no one to talk to, you're not communicating at all, really. I suppose you could be communicating with yourself, which you probably will be in the end. But really, you need, a communication is a definite two-way process. It's got to bounce. So you could be doing a presentation to 50 people, or you could be talking to 5 people around a table, or you can just be talking to one. And you will change the way you communicate depending on all those different circumstances. So, what is it? It's about understanding other people's needs and wishes. It's about letting people know you have heard and understood them. It's about acknowledging what they're saying to you. If you don't acknowledge what your service users are asking you, you won't develop a strong relationship with them. It's about being honest and open and being able to tell them what you can and can't do to meet those needs. They may have a wish that is, that you are not able to fulfill. They may not have the money to do something that they want to do. They may not be physically capable of doing something that they really want to do. So, you've got to be fairly open and honest about what can and can't be done. On its very basic level, it's about getting on with people, really. It's about showing them some respect and treating them as individuals and as equals. Now, you may wonder why we say that, but communication between equals can be very different from people who are very unequal. And if you treat them very unequally, they'll find it hard to trust you, to share the way they feel with you. That's why really good communication at work builds effective relationships. And remember, it's not just the service users, but it's with your wider colleagues as well. So why do people really communicate? Sometimes I do wonder why, someone talks to us and we do wonder why they're doing it. But, there are 4 main reasons. I'll give you a moment to see if you can jot down some ideas before we move on. What do you think the 4 main reasons to communicate are? Think about yourself, why do I communicate? Just take a moment to jot that down. Try out your ideas before I go on to tell you. Okay. There are 4, as I said, 4 reasons. One is instrumental, one is informative, one is expressive, and one is social. Okay. 4 different types of communication, really. Instrumental, we communicate in order to actually ask for something, to get something, to tell someone what we need. I need a drink. I want my dinner, that sort of thing. I want some help getting up. And also to review something. No, I don't like chocolate cake, thank you. Okay, really important to inform people of your likes and dislikes. There's also informative communication, to obtain information or to give another person information. Yes, that is my birthday. You are correct. Yes, I want the cardigan, the pink one. No, the one that's pink with the long sleeves, that sort of thing. Expressive communication is about sharing ideas, sharing how we feel about something. So different sort of language is probably used. Oh, I really love going to the cinema. I love to go and see. Here's my favourite movie star. I'll watch anything he's in or something. And social communication is about maintaining relationships, or about, attracting attention and forming those relationships in the first place, really. And again, that has a different style to it. If you're trying to chat up a nice girl across the table in a restaurant or something, it'll have a totally different style to instrumental when you're actually asking for a pizza for your dinner. Okay, so sort of bear in mind. Just a message from a piece of research. It's a piece of research by Moriarty. You could look this up a bit wider if you want. From the Social Care Institute of Excellence. We've talked about them before. They do lots of research. And they've highlighted some sort of particular poor practice in health and social care, very often in older people's services. And they've sort of been fairly critical about some of the language that care staff tend to use with more elderly or disabled people. They use these sort of exaggerated tones, and they use things like we and our instead of you and your. Now, you might want to think on this. You might want to have a look around the care homes that you might be working in and see if people do that. People do tend to lapse into it slightly, unfortunately. It's like, oh, this is, let's put our cardigan on today. Shall we put our cardigans on today? Well, you're not putting your cardigan on, she is. So it's like, would you like to put your cardigan on today? And these sort of endearments, such as dear and darling, and my love, and that, and they are meant to. They're genuinely probably meant to be very kind. But you are not treating people as equals if you just call them lovey and dear and sweetie and that sort of thing. And it's been so bad that they've actually sort of phrased it as elder speak, really, because it's just about being sort of fairly insulting to older people. And they say that some of these, another thing is about another piece of research they found out in residential care, and it's something again for you to look out for in your care homes, about comments about people sort of talking about residents even though they're just in front of them, particularly if they're in wheelchairs and that, and you're standing up. Oh yeah, Mrs. Jones, she was fine today. She's just here. So excluding the residents. And this, they say, sort of comes from a mistaken belief that someone's verbal communication skills have been affected. So if they struggle to speak, and we know that if someone's had a stroke or something like that, they may well struggle to speak. It doesn't mean to say they don't know and they don't understand what you're saying or saying about them. It's worse. So do remember those sorts of things. And even when someone's understanding is limited, they can usually pick up from some of your non-verbal language. They can pick up what you're saying about them. So just be, a little bit sensitive. Really think about that. And that's one of the things that SCI, Social Care Institutes for Excellence, recommended that staff needed quite a lot of training in after some of their most recent research. That was 2010. I'd like to hope that there's been a bit of a move on from then. It's been a while. But as I said, when you go into your care homes, look out for some things like this. And don't be afraid to point it out in a nice way. So, what ways do people communicate? Just in general at the moment, you don't have to think particularly of care, but how many can you think of? What are the different ways that people communicate? You might want a moment just to think that and jot down some ideas before I move on. So we've got verbal communication, we've got non-verbal communication and written communication. So verbal and non-verbal tend to go together. And written communication is sort of separate because there's ways of writing and reporting things that are important to be aware of. We're going to look at written communication in week 2. Okay, so here we're pretty much focusing on verbal and non-verbal communication. So let's think about, I just jotted down some of the ways that a care team can communicate using those 4 ideas. So you have team meetings where you sit around and chat about things, maybe do a bit of planning. You have morning briefings where people update each other on how Mrs. Jones was last night, really. You have face-to-face informal conversations, chatting with your colleagues, around the water cooler. You have greetings, in the general sort of hi, how are you? How was your weekend? That sort of thing. Within training, you may be shadowing, so you'll be talking about some of the things that you're doing there. And then there's sort of written communication, like the notice boards, timesheets, handover notes that are written down, policies and procedures, all your care plans. Things that are just left in your pigeonholes for you, maybe plans for an evening out or those sorts of things. And something more formal like your supervisions and appraisals would all be written down as well. So that covers, I'm sure not everything's covered, and maybe when you go into your care homes you can have a look and think, well, what else do we do? What other ways does this care team communicate? But I think we've covered quite a lot there. So let's think about verbal. As I said, we're focusing on verbal and non-verbal in this session. So it's not really just the words you use, but it's also other things such as the speed of how you speak. It can be quite significant. It can indicate someone's emotional state. For example, if someone's angry, they tend to speak, quite fast, or quite loudly also as well. or they get quite excited. While slow speech can be associated with tiredness as well, or someone could be, feeling a bit depressed or a bit down. So it's something to look out for. Or they could just be disinterested with what you've got to say to them as well. So be aware of that. Tone is really quite important, and sometimes people are not aware of it really. Your tone can be approving or disapproving, and sometimes people need to check themselves before they realise that a service user might have said something to them, and the tone they've responded in is like, "I wish you hadn't done that," sort of tone. So just be very aware of it, really, because it can have a significant impact. And if your tone is often disapproving or cross or irritated, then the service user will, they won't gel with you, they won't bond with you, and they probably rather not talk to you, quite honestly, as well. Volume, of course, is important. Um, Loud, if someone's loud, one often assumes they're angry or annoyed. Um, and yet, a lot of health and social care staff do speak very loudly. I don't know why they assume that everybody over a certain age is deaf, but they're not. And if they are, then that's something that you might work out individually with them. Very often, if they've been deaf for a while, they can lip read or they've got a hearing aid anyway, so they still don't need you to shout at them. So gauge that really well. There may be some service users who ask you to speak a bit louder. Fine, if that's something that you've worked out together, that's okay. But do remember, loud can sound aggressive and can be quite frightening for a service user if they're a little bit timid or if they're new, or if they don't really know you very well. How would you like it if someone sort of shouted at you regularly? You start to feel a bit miserable about the whole situation. And register, that really reflects about whether you're speaking formally or informally. And you could be talking to the service user and you can actually change the register and they will pick up on that. And that can be quite useful or it can be a bit weird for them. So it really depends, again, on the relationship. So if you're going to sit down and doing a care plan, you might sort of say, well, we've got this care plan to do. I just want to work through it. So you keeping yourselves fairly formal on track. It's not a time to get distracted into saying, oh, did you watch the TV last night? Did you like that program? Well, I watched that as well. If you switch between the two, for some service users, that could be quite difficult. Also, you might use a different register when you're talking to your care home manager than maybe when you're talking to one of your colleagues. I think we all sort of know about that. So let's look at a non-verbal. Give it some thought. What is it? When we talk about non-verbal communication, let's think about the whole body. We know non-verbal communication is really about looking at the way people use their body, to enhance what they're saying, and it gives off a huge impression, really, doesn't it? It can show confidence, it can show insecurity, and that will be communicated to the person that you're speaking to. Here's a sort of funny little picture for you of two ex-presidents. So I'm sure you know both of them. You can create a caption if you want. I did that as a bit of fun for people. But really, you've got two very, very different types of body language there. I'm not going to explain it to you because I'm pretty sure you can work it out. But have a look. You've got Donald Trump on one side who looks desperately uncomfortable and clearly does not want to be there. I do not know why, but and then on the other side you've got Barack Obama who looks totally in control, very comfortable. He's doing all the classic things that are saying that he's open, he's ready to engage, ready to discuss. Donald Trump's got his hands between his legs, protecting the vital area. That's one of the things that you do when you feel very insecure and very nervous. He's not giving eye contact to the reporters. He's sort of staring. I don't know what he's staring at, really. Sort of, he's away with the fairies, really. He's staring into the distance almost. You can see he's not really looking at anyone in particular, and he doesn't want to either. His whole face and body language. He's quite hunched. His shoulders are together. Um, Whereas Obama's got that sort of classic lean that shows like I'm a guy in control. I know what's going on here. And he's got a half smile on his face, so he's engaging. So and, yeah, this is nice. I don't mind talking to reporters. So you've got two people in the same very very important job, although both of them I think have left it by this time. Showing you a total different sort of view of the way they look at the world, really, or I don't know how they look at things. So have a thought about that, and have a think about which one of these two you'd like to be, and like to, what sort of demeanor you'd like to show when you're at work. Um, you know, I'll just leave that one with you, really. So, what's it about? Well, you've got a little worksheet. Um, I'd like you to have a go and fill it in. You can take a moment, maybe do this before you move on. The worksheet's there on Google Classroom for you. You can click into it and come up with some ideas. I would guess you'd probably be able to interpret most of them, but if there's any you're not sure of, please look them up so that you've got a nice comprehensive idea of some of the non-verbal types of positions. Okay. We all do them, and maybe sort of look at them and think, which ones do you do a lot? Which ones do you do not so much? Which ones maybe you should do, or which ones maybe you shouldn't do so much. Just give that some thought, really, as we go through the unit. Okay, so moving on to active listening, another area, particularly for those of you in the care field, is that certain type of listening, which is going that little bit further than just when you're sitting chatting with your friends, and sometimes you'd be half listening, not fully listening. This is about engaging as a professional, really. And there are some very specific listening skills. I've given you a chapter of a book as part of your extra reading. I sort of mentioned you can read it. It's quite a lot, so you don't have to read it all this week. You can read it as you go through the unit if you want, but it will give you a lot more detail about the role of active listening. And there's plenty of stuff on Google for you to find out as well. Plenty of books available. Some of the main highlights of active listening is about asking open-ended questions. So don't just ask them questions where they can say yes or no to, because you're trying to open and keep conversation going. Request clarification. If you're really not sure what she meant or what she was saying, check it. Don't assume that you got it right. Okay. So, if somebody said something, you say, "Oh, Mary, did you mean that happened on Wednesday? Or did you mean it was your grandchildren that you were worried about?" Just be clear, because remember, you've got to put some things into someone's notes. You might be sending important information to the next shift. So make sure you've got it clear. Be attentive. Show that you're listening. Use your body language to show you're listening. Use some eye contact. Don't terrify them by staring at them, but show attention. Summarize every now and then. You can just stop people and just say, "Oh, we've been talking about a lot of things. Can I just pick out some of the main points to sort of summarize our conversation?" They might be the points that you want to make notes of in their notes. Paraphrasing as well. If you're not really sure of what they mean, try and say it in a different way back to them. You say, "Oh, when you say this, do you mean?" And put it in different words to make sure that you have understood it. And if they say, "Yes, yes, that's what I meant," you go, "Okay, great." So you might put it in language that you use. Say, "Oh, yeah, I would say this. Do you mean that?" It's all about sort of the relationship you develop. Reflecting feelings as well, to make them realize that you care and you've understood. "Oh, you seem to be feeling, you look like you look quite sad. Am I correct?" So be attuned to those feelings, but also reflect them back. "Oh, you look quite upset about that. Is that?" And obviously if they're crying their eyes out, you probably worked it out. But and ask more probing questions. So they might tell you something, and if you feel like there's more, you might ask them a probing question, but be careful. Remember, it's not an interrogation. So, if she says, "Oh, so and so was really rude to me. I got really upset about it." Oh, can you tell me why? Can you tell me what happened? So probe along. Just don't go, okay, she was upset because someone said. Find out more about what happened. So while you're doing your active listening, what sort of non-verbal cues should be showing? Think about it. What else should you be showing? Your body language should be directing towards them to show that you're interested. Eye contact, like I said, don't stare at people and terrify them, but you do need to give them a fair bit of eye contact. You might want to lean towards someone. There are some sort of bits of body language you can use. If the relationship is right, you might be able to touch their arm or their shoulder to show reassurance if they're upset. You need to play that one by ear because some people don't like being touched, and you need to know that. You need to know what they do and don't like. They don't, you don't. Not everybody wants to be sort of hugged and cuddled, so just be conscious. But maybe a touch on the arm or a touch on the hand, just as reassurance, or touch on the elbow can be quite good. The leaning towards someone and making sure you're sitting down at the same height again is really, really important. So, sort of, as well as having those non-verbal cues that you're looking interested, that you're not yawning, you're not snoring, you're not staring off into the distance, going, "Oh God, when is my dinner?" You're not looking at your watch regularly because that's the height of rudeness anyway. But people do it. Those sorts of things. And additionally, you need to remember those 8 active tips. Okay, listening may be enough. You don't necessarily have to fix the problem then and there. Sometimes just letting them get it out is all that you need. You need to show a bit of empathy, especially if their feelings are fairly negative. Try to validate them. Okay, say, "I understand how you feel." um, Try to put yourself in their shoes. Use positive body language. We've just talked about that. Ask the appropriate questions. Don't just jump in and give advice. They might not be wanting your advice. They might just be upset. Okay, and your advice might not be appropriate. So first of all, find out what they've got to say. Evaluating the conversation is what I said before about summarizing and paraphrasing, checking that you have the information right. And don't judge them. They might do something that you disapprove of, but you must not show judgment. You must be able to listen and take it all down and take it all in. Okay. So you don't have to fix the problem and you don't have to advise people. I know sometimes people do look to you for advice, but maybe it's not appropriate that you have advice. So sometimes you say, "I can't advise you on what to do there, but if you want to talk about it some more, maybe you'll come to your right decision." Okay, one of our criteria, 1.4, is about the potential barriers to communication. And there's all sorts of different things that could really be a barrier. I've got a little graph here. Physical environment, it could be just too noisy, too hot, too cold. The time might be wrong, the place might be wrong. The medium that you're using, you might have a load of written stuff and the person's struggling with it, and maybe their eyesight's not very good, or maybe their understanding's, being affected by their illness. It could be semantics. They don't understand the language that you use, or they don't understand your language at all. I mean, that's a real problem. Cultural barriers. Some cultural differences make people sort of not always be on the same wavelength. Like, oh, something that's quite shocking in one person's culture might not be an issue in another's. So you have to sort of play that by ear as well, or learn what you can. Psychological attitudes, someone's upset, they're angry, they're depressed. they're related, all of these affect the way they communicate, and that can be a barrier too. And their understanding and comprehension, again, if someone's had a stroke or if they've got dementia, their comprehension could be really affected. So you really need to get to know the person to know, what they can respond to and how well. So let's think. Here's some big issues: language issues, cultural differences, emotional issues, sensory needs, physical, environmental. Take a moment to jot down some ideas. Just take some space to think about what can I do for these different things. Okay, just jot some ideas. If you were talking maybe on a one-to-one with a service user, what would you do about language barriers? What would you do about cultural differences? Let's see what ideas that you can come up with before I go on to discuss it. So take a moment. And then you can click on to the next slide. Okay, language. If you don't share the same language, that could be a real problem. I mean, long term, it'd be nice to learn the language, or maybe have someone on staff who speaks that language. If you're particularly looking at someone's care plans and the information is very important, you absolutely must have an interpreter or translator, really. If people have a little bit of one language but not as much, then you find your sort of shortcuts for doing it. You can't obviously get a translator in for every single conversation. If you're just talking with someone about what they might like to eat, you could use pictures and graphics instead, because they'll soon work that one out. So use other assistances. Use Google Translate. We've all got it on our phones. Sometimes it goes completely wrong, but a lot of the time it can be helpful. Accents and dialects. If people come from an area where you don't know the accent terribly well, that can be a problem. Or it could be your accent. You come from a different part of the country and they don't understand your accent. So try to speak clearly, and when you're working with a service user, if you're working in the same language, try to sort of reduce your accent as much as possible by speaking sort of clearly and maybe a little bit slower than you do normally. But just be aware of your accent, and maybe sort of try to tone it down. It's not always easy, I know, but it's what you have to do. Slang, jargon. There's lots and lots of words we use in care that no one else in the world uses. Just to be a bit conscious about what you're saying, and don't get too prissy about using sort of professional words. That's no help to the service user. You need to break it down into relatively simple, straightforward language. So try not to use jargon. Medical people are probably the absolute worst for that sort of thing. So try not to do it really, and particularly don't do it in their notes. Environmental issues. If they're too hot, too cold, and uncomfortable, they find it difficult to concentrate. Lighting and noise. I mean, if you have an important conversation about something very intimate, you wouldn't want to do it in the middle of the lounge when the TV's on or everyone's watching a movie or something like that, or in the dining room when everyone's eating. You'd go to their room maybe afterwards, especially if you're talking about something intimate. If an individual doesn't have their basic needs met, they cannot focus on communication. If you want to talk to someone about the planning of an activity, and you haven't given them their breakfast yet, they can find it quite difficult to concentrate. Or if they're desperate for a cup of tea, um, that will just override everything really. So just be aware of that. Physical, geographical. Mostly people do like to communicate face to face, but can't always do that. Technology can be super helpful. Obviously, nowadays, people, if someone's got family, especially if they're older and their family have left the country, gone off somewhere else to work and that, using things like Zoom and Skype or FaceTime really makes it wonderful for them, because they can actually talk to families in other countries, and you can actually bring people together that way. So that's something to do. So that's a barrier you can overcome nowadays using technology. Sensory impairment can be difficult. If someone has a sensory impairment, if someone is hard of hearing, they make sure that their hearing aids are working and that they've got them in, because that doesn't happen sometimes. And make sure their batteries are up to date and charged. There's nothing more infuriating for the person than if people aren't checking their batteries and the hearing aid's not working. Some people will use sign language. They may well have learnt it at school if they've been deaf for a long time. Lots of people learn to lip read. So be aware of that. Be conscious of the things you say about someone. Just because they're deaf doesn't mean they can't read your lips. So, but if you are dealing with someone who's got a sensory difference, try to avoid unnecessary background noise because that really interferes with their concentration. People who are blind, they can still hear and they can still speak. Very often some people will use Braille to read. But otherwise, remember that the rest of their senses are functioning. It's very easy for us to forget. Non-verbal individuals may be happy to write things. So if someone's had a stroke and they've lost their verbal ability, and using picture books, we've talked about these before, and signs, they can learn Makaton, they can learn British Sign Language as well, or American Sign Language, depending on what they use where you are, or just create their own signs, which works for people. So this is where your non-verbal communication comes in. If someone's stressed or agitated, it's very difficult to communicate them when they're in that situation. So the primary objective there will be to help them calm down first, because you're not getting anywhere. If you're trying to have a conversation with someone and they're very freaked out about something, you really need to bring them down, giving them the space to calm down, showing them some empathy. Don't be cross with them. Don't be agitated. Once the individual is calmer, then you can sit down and find out what was going on, really. You might want to give them a drink of something and then step away from them, let them have that to help them calm down. A cup of tea often works for a lot of people, actually. Or just be around and say, when you're ready, I'll come back to you. So let's summarize what we need to do to communicate effectively. Effective communication in care settings can help both the care workers and the people who use the service. People will communicate at their best when they feel relaxed and they're able to empathize with the other person, and the relationship develops into something warm and genuine. It also relies the care worker to develop and use the skills, abilities and communication techniques are in the graphic there. So active listening, like we've talked about, good written communication, proper notes taken when needed, non-verbal communication, remember positive movement, showing someone that you're interested, not yawning or fidgeting, that sort of thing. Good presentation skills if you're doing something more formal. Patient education, so helping people, giving them more information all the time. It can be sort of quite formal information, information about their illness, but it could just be general information about what's happening in the place. Showing a bit of compassion, having some awareness of someone's differences in cultures, to make sure that you don't upset someone or, cross into an area that you shouldn't. So there's, if someone comes in from a different culture, it's up to the team, if nobody really knows about that culture, to get the information and, discuss it at a team meeting. Say, right, I've done a bit of research on this lady's culture. And then, of course, check it out with her, because just because someone comes from that culture, they might not observe every part of it. So you do need to check things out. Make a personal connection with them and hopefully they'll develop some trust with you. People use different forms of body language to communicate feelings. A lot of people who are good use the SOLAR acronym. SOLAR here, if you have a look in my thing. And this adds to your active listening. This is about your body language. So it's quite easy to remember. So square, S, square. Sit squarely, face the speaker. Squarely means not sort of like leaning away in the opposite direction if they're over there, but sitting properly down in a chair towards them. O, open. Remember Barack Obama. Don't sit like Donny. Sit like Barack. Okay, that's a good one. Sit like Barack. Open. Keep your legs and arms uncrossed because that's a defensive sit. Sit back like he was. Eye contact. Okay. Lean towards the speaker when you're asking the question, or sometimes if they're quiet, you might lean towards them just to hear them a little bit better. Maintain that eye contact, but remember, don't stare at them as they think you're a bit crazy. So it's maintain a bit of eye contact, flicker away, maintain a bit of eye contact. Okay, but please not big open stares, just a gentle flick towards them. Maybe a bit of a smile as well. Okay, and relax, stay cool, keep from fidgeting. Don't keep looking at your watch, don't keep scratching your head because they know then you're not interested in what they've got to say. Care workers often adjust their proximity by moving the chair to the person. But before you do that, do remember to check that they want you there. You know, they might not be in the mood and they might just say, yeah, can you come and talk to me in half an hour? I'm a bit upset at the moment. So just say, is it okay if I sit down with you? Can I talk to you for a little bit? You know, do check in with people. We are not all in the mood to chat. And when we're not, then when someone's forcing themselves on us, it makes it quite difficult. Okay, that's all I have for you today. In extra reading, there is quite a large chapter, as I said, from a textbook on communication. So do take your time to read through that. You don't have to read it all this week if you want to. You can read it in fits and starts through the unit, but do finish it before the end of the unit. And give some thought. There's some quite nice case studies and reflections in there for you to think about your work. You know, how would I do this? So give some thought to the reflections. Have a look at the case studies and sort of, you know, think about whether they'd be quite useful in the care home that you'd be working in. Okay. And that's it for this week. I will see you next week. So bit of extra reading, and if you haven't finished your active listening worksheet, then do that. Your body language worksheet, and also there'll be a quiz for this week for you to have a look at as well. Okay, thank you. I'll see you in week 2. Bye.